Is there a slide for the sermon? So most of you here know Brian Thompson. One of Reverend Paul's final acts here is taking me to Byron, to Brian's group home to introduce me to him. We spent an afternoon together. Reverend Paul smuggled in beer. Apparently he did it all the time when he went to visit Brian. Brian was very excited because he knew what was coming. We had a lovely afternoon chatting and getting to know each other. And I found him, it was so unexpected for me. I found him to be fascinating, warm and funny and wise. And I don't know if you guys here know that Brian is a comedian and public speaker. So he had me in stitches the whole afternoon. Brian often gets engagements at Fanshawe College to speak with personal support worker students who would exclusively be caring for quadriplegic folk like Brian. So Brian's focus during these lectures is to share his story, to tap into the empathetic and compassionate core of these students, so that when they're ready to go out into the field, they would be more caring and thoughtful as they look after the members of the immobilized community. It's just a wonderful program. So I was there on Wednesday afternoon, and I hung out with Brian for a while, and then afterwards I stuck around and we took pictures and he answered questions and so on. So on Wednesday's lecture at Fanshawe, the lecture was powerful and moving and jarring. And Brian has given me permission to share his story. And I'm going to only share a little snippet of it. But I'm going to warn you that this is going to be very painful to hear. He was in what he called an institution in Toronto from his teenage years, and he told of the abuse he suffered there. He told of having his head banged against the wall every evening at the same time, so that, he quoted his abuser, he may get used to his life there. But the most difficult story is the one where he fell off his bed one night onto a space heater, and his cries were ignored all night. And he laid on that heater all night with it going on and off until he was found in the morning. Burning his flesh all night. He was hospitalized for a while after that. That's where he met Sue Browning, who was doing a chaplaincy at the Children's Hospital. He was hospitalized. He was there for a while to treat the third-degree burns that he got from that event. He still suffers greatly from that horrible event, both physically and emotionally. I'm sorry. I am traumatized by it. And as as I wrote this, I kept thinking, he said I should share, but I kept thinking, I can't share this with these people who love him. Because imagine what it's doing for me, to me. And I am used to stories like these, working in the mission. What's it going to do to you guys? So imagine what he goes through when he thinks about it. It was difficult for him. He burst out in tears as he was sharing. I think as we all were in the room crying, because he relives the horror every time he thinks about it, and certainly every time he shares the story. But he braves the trauma time and time again with tears and a broken voice, so that he may share, tell the stories, so that others in his condition would not have to endure what he did. And so I left Fanshawe on Wednesday feeling all sorts of things. But the thing I left feeling the most was admiration for Brian. Admiration for this man who had lived all his life in a wheelchair, who had endured so much physically and emotionally, but who had the courage to push through it all so that he could live a life as fully as he possibly could, and so that he could be an advocate for others. 2 weeks ago, we were celebrating heroes who had gone to war. And I'm telling you, I consider Brian to be a hero for what he does. A true leader who is making a difference in our world. But Yahweh did promise us that leaders like Brian will be raised up in our world, who would stir our hearts and our minds to be better people and do better things. Verse 4 of our text that Marian read today from Jeremiah 23 says, I will place leaders among them who will tend them, so that they will no longer be afraid or terrified. Isn't that an apt verse to reflect the work that Brian is doing to ensure that the physically and otherwise challenged members of our community would receive the best care with dignity and compassion? We will raise leaders among you who would tend to the people so that none of them will no longer be afraid or terrified. The great mystery is raising up so many leaders among us to brave the horrors of this world. And they are coming from the most unexpected places. Even in this world when the times seem to be so bleak, somewhere, someone is being nurtured and raised to meet your particular challenge. Someone is being raised who will have a breakthrough cure for the thing that ails you and your family member. Someone is being raised right now who has the words, who will say that particular word you need to hear, so that you may feel comforted and at peace. Someone is being raised who will have the ability to nudge you in the right direction, so that once again you will feel reinvigorated and stronger and energized to live your life fully. Someone is being raised up right now to tend to you.
Yes, it's like a guardian angel being born and raised with us to interact.
Yes.
Along the way.
100%. They exist. There is someone there, a leader who will come forth and change your life. The great mystery is generating leaders among us who will tend to us so we no longer be afraid. Can someone say amen?
Amen.
Amen. You know, one of my favorite verses in the good book is found in Jeremiah, chapter 29, verse 11. And it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for your welfare and not for evil, to give you a future with hope." What a powerful verse. The Holy One knows our needs and sends people to tend to them, sometimes the most unexpected people. And oftentimes, we don't realize who they are. Oftentimes, we think we're alone, but we're never alone. In Brian's presentation, he was clear in sharing that his life had some horrible moments, but his life also had some great moments. He told of his friendship with Rita McNeil, how often they spoke and how she held up one of her shows in Toronto once so that she may talk with him backstage. And she says they could wait. The people could wait. I'm hanging with you right now. She made it clear that he mattered more than what she was going to go out there and do. What a true Canadian treasure she was. And what an unexpected leader who was sent to tend to our world. Rita had such a difficult life, being born with the cleft lip, bullied mercilessly as a child, being sexually abused at a young age by a family member, enduring crippling alcoholism within her household, getting pregnant out of wedlock in that day and place where that was so frowned upon, struggling with the shame of her weight all her life. My goodness. She had been through so much, but through it all, Rita became such a heroic leader for so many of us, and certainly for Brian. Her music has tended to our hearts, and her sense of humanity has tended to our belief that there is good in the world. My message to you today is that the mystery of our faith, the Holy One, Yahweh, is busy raising leaders from among us. And you know, perhaps they are already around you. Perhaps they're already in your life. But like I said, you just haven't noticed. And maybe you haven't taken notice because effective leaders aren't always necessarily extremely visible like I am in my role. They may be leading in small ways in your life, in the community, Perhaps just making phone calls and checking up on people, being the go-to in the community for information like historical matters and so on. One of the people who I consider to be such an amazing leader in this Mount Zion community does so much of her work behind the scenes. And I have just gotten here, but I know that she's one of my best resources as I do ministry here. The wind beneath my wings, as it were. Where do you see the most unassuming people who have become leaders in your community? Perhaps it's you. Perhaps it's you, but you've never really thought about it. Perhaps the Spirit is calling you to assume your role as leader, maybe at work, maybe here in the church or in the wider community. And perhaps this message today is your sign. You know, when I got called to ministry, I fought it tooth and nail. Wasn't interested, didn't care. And I used to tell Paul, no, this is not my thing. And Paul used to call me Jonah. He used to say, you know, Charmian, I'll be right here for you when you end up in the belly of the whale. He told me that all the time. He says, I'll be there to get you out of the whale, Charmian. Jeremiah 23:4. Yahweh says, I will place leaders who will tend to my people, so that they will no longer be afraid or terrified. And so today we thank the great mystery for raising leaders who tend to us, who take care of us, who speak to our hearts and our compassion, who empower us, who assure us, and who in turn raise us up. Leaders like Brian Thompson, who will undoubtedly leave this world better than he found it. Amen.